When did the class clown take it too far? Pulled out a chair from underneath a kid, thinking it would be funny when the kid fell. The kid ended up falling and cracking his head open and getting around 30 stitches. Kid was always doing dumb stunts just to make people laugh. He got sick of climbing on/in random things and jumping stairs one day, and decided it'd be funny to smack into walls. His first few walls were fine as they were concrete. There was a girl crying in the hallway and he figured he could make her laugh by making a funny face and tackling the glass door. He went through the door and needed stitches, leaving splatters of blood and broken glass on the way to the office. Did it make her laugh? Laugh? No. But it did distract her from what was bothering her as she was busy trying to help. So that's a plus, I suppose. Senior year, teacher wouldn't give her a hall pass to use the bathroom, which was ridiculous. Instead of taking a more conventional stand, like walking out of the room, she sat down in her desk and peed her pants. She was suspended, I forget for how long. There were editorials back and forth in the school newspaper. I was on team, teachers shouldn't try to control our bowels, but also maybe don't pee on the floor. Though I do appreciate your taking one for the team. Junior year in high school in Algebra 2. The teacher was kind of a douche, so this one guy, let's call him Mike, would give him a hard time. This was a regular thing, and Mike would get kicked out of class for saying and doing some inappropriate stuff, but we all thought it was hilarious. One day, our teacher didn't show up for class. Word got around that his oldest son had died of a drug overdose, and he had to take some personal time off. He didn't show back up until a week later, and he looked really sullen and down. During class, Mike pulled out a can of Coca-Cola and started sipping it nonchalantly. Teacher had a strict no eating or drinking in class policy, and Mike was aware of this. He told Mike to throw it away and step outside. Mike, the absolute freaking savage, says, "Look, I know you don't like Coke, but I'm sure your son did." Nobody laughed. Just silence. Some people didn't get it. The ones who did were just too shocked to say anything, like me. Mike threw his drink away and walked out of the classroom while the teacher just sort of haphazardly continued his lesson, although we could tell Mike's comment fricked him up. There was a class clown in my class and another one from a senior class at the time. They'd collaborated to throw toilet paper all over the schoolyard as a joke. I forget exactly what it was, but there was some kind of very important event going on that day, and we were supposed to have a lot of visitors that afternoon. The principal was not amused. He said if they'd done it any other day, he'd probably just have let it go, after making them clean it up. They got detention, and one of the teachers made them personally apologize to the elderly janitor who had to clean up that crap in the dark when it was freezing cold. I knew a guy, high school student in the late 60s. He and his best friend were very close, but had also dated the same girl. My buddy dated this girl first. Now his friend was dating her. No problems, but they both understood how this could be perceived as a potential friendship ender. They had a joke all planned out. The best friend grabbed some ketchup packets from a fast food restaurant. After lunch, he was sitting in class with the packets torn slightly, tucked unnoticeably in his hand. My buddy had the starter pistol from the track and field team. You see where this is going. My buddy ran into the classroom and shouted, "You can't steal my girl from me. If I can't have her, no one can." He fired the starter pistol, filled with blanks, not bullets, in the direction of his best friend. The friend, who had jumped up from his desk during the shouting, clutched his chest from the fake bullet wound, sending horrifying streaks of red, ketchup, flying all over his white shirt. He collapsed. The look of horror on the face of every student in that room, my buddy said, was amazing. He and his best friend both got detention. Similar story. When I was in middle school, we needed to dissect a perch. We were allowed to pick our own groups, but because I didn't have any friends in the class, I got stuck with the obnoxious kids. One of them had the genius idea of putting his mouth up to the fish's anus and sucking it like a straw. He ended up throwing up. Friend decided to shove his hands into my back pockets and grab my ass. Wasn't wearing a belt. Ended up panting me straight to the floor. I was wearing spandexy type underwear at the time. Caught those on the way down too and ended up pulling it down to where my dick sprung out of them. What was bad was worse, as our track coach had just walked in looking for me, and she got a full frontal. Not to mention the class saw everything as well as I tried to pull my pants up, only to realize my dick was out on full display. Didn't even get detention, SMH. Had a friend in high school. Always would invite me to his parties. He was a popular guy on the wrestling team, and I was not, so he was always trying to hook me up with chicks. Anyways, went to a few of his parties and each were more crazy than the next. The final one he had was insane, hundreds of people. Went upstairs to check on him because he'd had a lot to drink. Passed the bathroom where some guys were popping Molly, then went to his room. As I was about to knock, he opens the door, looks me dead in the eyes and says, "I just got nailed in the ass," with the most pale and wild expression. Instantly, I asked him if he's okay. A split second later, he just flips his mind and expression to being the charismatic jock that he is. The other guy was another ladies' man jock on the football team. He came up to me a few days later and laughed it off like it was a joke. And was like, "What happened at the party stays at the party. Lol. Just clowning around, I guess. Both are now happily married to women. I can only imagine how they initiated that. First year of middle school, we met the class clown. Funny little white fricker. He was the most entertaining part of the school for us, and he usually pushed the boundaries. But that's why people liked him, and found him a funny character, because he went overboard and was always a blast. But one time, I remember like it was yesterday, he hatched a plan for everyone to hide in the classroom from the teacher. We followed, all hiding. Problem was, the roll was done every 40 minutes to prevent wagging. Teacher came and freaked the hell out. Ran to the headmaster's office and the whole school went into lockdown. We didn't know it was because of us, and so we stayed hidden for an hour. All of our parents were sent lengthy emails regarding our little prank. We agreed not to daub on the class clown, but some jackass split the beans and he got suspended. When he came back, he wasn't quite the same class clown he was, and we all missed him. We still talk about this to this day, and is often the first topic we go to when we catch up every now and then. The really attractive popular girl was chatting on the school field. Class clown took a skateboard off someone and decided to draw attention to himself by riding it down the path towards her. I think in his 13-year-old horny brain, he was going to impress her with his daredevil skills. Then he was going to accidentally, on purpose, fall/leap off and grab her for support. I assume his horny brain made him think that the worst case, she would get knocked to the floor and then he could use this opportunity to grab her hand and pull her up again. What actually happened is that he went way too fast and smashed into her. He then landed heavily on top of her. She couldn't move and was fully screaming, saying she couldn't move and couldn't feel her legs. We all thought her back was broken. Teachers came running. An ambulance had to be called to the school field. She got taken away in a stretcher and neck brace. Luckily, it wasn't broken, and she was okay after a hospital and a few weeks off school. Not sure what was actually wrong with her, sorry. Class clown moved to Australia not long after, so he got lucky there. I imagine he stays awake at night thinking about this. Certain to be buried, but deserves to be told. Hang on, there's a little length. High school, 80s, rural-ish Michigan. Class clown is also a fairly decent artist who draws comic book style stuff. He decides to make a comic about our vice principal, Mr. Schellenbarger, styled himself a hard ass. It was the 80s, so troublesome classrooms and persons got lectured about teamwork, that he'd stud with mild profanity because he's tough and real. He had a mullet and a pencil porn stash. Said clown/artist decides to make a comic about Mr. S as a, you guessed it, vice principal who eats a piece of radioactive pizza in the lunchroom and turns into a superhero. Super Schellenbarger. He wears, revealing tights, cape, and a big S. He attempts to foil the plots of various high schoolers and comes across, you guessed it, inept every time. It was, indeed, a brilliant parody, far beyond a typical high schooler's capability. But it didn't stop there. At the end, in the final panel, full page, Super S is off work, dressed in full gay Leatherman BDSM apparel, chaps, vest, biker hat, walking into the Blue Oyster, that famous homosexual trope bar from Police Academy. He's high-fiving the doorman with a predictable limp wrist. There's a helpful note explaining if you don't know what the Blue Oyster is. And let's face it, what high schooler didn't? Just check out the movie. In the 80s, the implication an adult was homosexual was just too much, too funny, too insulting. He proceeded to copy hundreds using the school copier and distribute. The real Mr. S lost his freaking mind. Without going through any kind of protocol, reviewing with principal, school board, checking rules, etc., he hops on the school intercom. He proceeded to rail against it for several minutes, ending with, any student caught with a copy will be expelled. Any faculty caught with it will be disciplined. The perpetrators will be expelled and not eligible for graduation anywhere. Apparently, Mr. S, or at least this move, was equally popular with the staff, because my next period, biology, the teacher held up a copy and proceeded to lecture us how it wasn't allowed. To be certain we knew what was against the rules, he read the entire comic to the class, and laughed, and talked about insecurities. Turns out Mr. S couldn't actually expel or even punish anyone who had a copy. In fact, turns out, the perpetrator, who owned up to it, didn't do anything wrong. Pesky free speech. Finally, what they hung on him was using the school copier to make copies. He had to pay for the paper/supplies and was told probably not to do it again. In geometry class, he, Joe, stood up, loudly exclaimed, "I can't take it anymore," and jumped out the window. The class was on the second floor. Our math teacher, Mr. Whitehead, no joke, who had been teaching for about 35 years, ran to the window and looked out, but he couldn't see him. Whitehead ran downstairs and must have got the principal, Mr. Rhodes, to search for Joe. Joe had actually jumped onto the ledge and rolled next to the wall. By the time Mr. Rhodes got to the classroom, Joe crawled back in and sat at his desk pretending to be asleep. Fortunately, an ambulance had been called because Mr. Whitehead had a heart attack. Whitehead went to the hospital, Joe got expelled. This story wasn't something done on purpose, but got a bad reaction because it happened to the class clown when we were in junior high. It's a classic case of a boy who cried wolf one too many times, or I guess made one too many jokes. During testing, where we were all assigned to specific rooms, we were being held from lunch because one of the rooms was having some issues testing on time. Didn't think much of it, just figured they'd started late at the beginning of the day. We were held up for like 30 minutes at the most. When we were finally let out for lunch, the real reason we were held back quickly spread across my whole class. Apparently the dude who was one of the designated class clowns of my grade had been joking around with some friends, but stopped suddenly and started spazzing out at his desk. Everyone was laughing at him for a minute or so, thinking it was a joke since he does that stuff all the time. They all stopped laughing when he fell out of his chair though. Turned out the guy was having a seizure. We all got held back in our rooms because we were waiting for an ambulance to come get the guy, and the school didn't want everyone to see it. He's fine. He went through the rest of high school with no further incidents, and as far as I know, he's doing okay in our second year of college. But the story of that happening is still something people in my graduating class talk about. Reminds me of the class clown at my school. I went to a rural Christian school in Center, Ohio, which also had an adjoining church. The pastor's grandson got in trouble for multiple things, including beating the crap out of another kid who had made fun of his haircut, throwing a King James Bible out the window of Bible class, entirely by accident actually, he was trying to kill a wasp, and eventually got expelled for getting ratted out for selling weed and doing lean in math class, at least from what I heard. The kid did a lot of dumb jokes overall, but is still remembered for his craziness. We had this one kid in our class in high school. I don't want to call him weird, and I'm genuinely not sure if he had a disorder, but he spoke with a lisp and didn't seem to have many friends. Our interactions were few and, well, weird, for lack of a better word. I don't mean the offensive weird, just the objective, not normal. The only vivid memory I have of him is being 2 seats away from him being asleep in class and hearing a little sputtering noise and seeing his desk coated in water. Kid between us goes, Did you just throw up on the desk? He responds with, no, it's just water. And then we just went about our day like nothing ever happened. Never wiped it up, never questioned it. Just continued learning about whatever crap I was learning in that class. We had a girl like that. We had those tall science room stools with a gap in the middle for us to use as a handle. We heard a weird splashing sound and there was a bit of a whispered commotion near her. Then, another girl who was sat near Weird Girl put up her hand and said, Miss, can you come here? The teacher walked down the class to the Weird Girl's desk and saw what was clearly pee all over the floor. She tried to handle it without embarrassing the girl, but obviously this was hard. Weird Girl was getting annoyed at the teacher saying, it's just water, and refused all offers to leave the room. She sat there in her pee the whole lesson, with pee all over the floor because she wouldn't clean it up when the teacher said, oh, it's just water. Okay, clean it up then. Another time she did the same thing and was going, it's just water, and arguing with people who sat around her who were all saying, no it isn't, you've done this twice now. She was super strange. It came across more as punishing people by making them smell her pee than having a medical issue. It was all so strange and creepy. He would try to jump around parkour style desk to desk all class long. Sometimes would fall comically, breaking things and falling in people, trying to get a laugh, constantly redirected for trying to do run flips on the wall, telling terrible jokes, or balancing large objects on himself. He always wanted attention. We just wanted to learn beginning French. We all, including the teacher, took to ignoring him. One day he couldn't handle people not paying attention to him, so he tried to see if he, for the first time ever, could do a backflip. Landed on his neck. Was out of the class for a while. My favorite science teacher's room had a drop ceiling. Every day after school, I'd take a yardstick and randomly select a ceiling tile to lift up and place askew out of its frame. The science classroom was cluttered as hell, so it didn't look too obvious. After 3 weeks, I'd moved 15 panels out of place, and the teacher hadn't noticed. On the 4th week, she suddenly noticed, and thought her freshman homeroom class had done it all at once, that morning, as a prank while she wasn't looking. She yelled at them for 15 minutes about disrespecting her classroom, and then made them all put the ceiling tiles back in their correct positions. I never fessed up after seeing how angry she was. I thought it was a good, harmless prank, but based on her reaction, I obviously didn't read the situation correctly. Yeah, that always happens with these gradual pranks. People assume you did it all at once. Like when my buddy dumped out about a gallon of acorns out of his bag and got real mad that I just poured acorns into his bag. I'm like, nah man, I've been putting single acorns in there every chance I get for weeks, and you finally saw one and found them all. He had not seen the gradual building humor in the same way I and my co-acorners had though, and continued to believe I just scooped up a double armful of acorns into his bag somehow. He did later see the humor in it when I acorned him again, and he went somewhere else with a different group of people and started angrily pouring acorns out of his bag. Everyone around him was like, what the hell, dude? There aren't even acorns around here. And he's like, I freaking know, damn it, and told them the story. They laughed, he laughed, now it's all good. Kinda gross, but funny as hell. Class clown was my friend's older brother. He should have been in special needs by the way he acted sometimes. Anywho, Bob, real name, don't give an F, got into the habit of wrapping his hands in toilet paper, then crapping in his hands and flinging the crap over the stall, at the wall, or any suspecting kid who was not aware of his tricks. Teachers normally did not use the student bathrooms, but this one teacher needed to because his pen exploded all over his hand and he went to wash it off. Bob was not aware of the teacher's presence and flung the crap over the stall and hit the teacher in the back, splattering crap all over him. Teacher flipped out. Bob started laughing at him. Teacher got more mad. Parents called, suspension and apology in store for Bob. He actually said to the teacher, "I am sorry, that was a crappy thing that I did." From what I heard, the principal, assistant principal, Bob's dad all laughed. Bob kept a straight face. The mother and teacher were pissed. Bob got suspended for 2 weeks, had to do many hours of volunteer work at the school, and was basically no more strikes until he graduated. Bob was very boring after that. 1969. We had a guy that lived on the street next to mine that made a bomb. It was made of old-fashioned ceramic drain pipe, filled with a type of black powder and plugged on both ends. There was a hole on one end where he'd place a lit cigarette as a fuse. He drove to the high school on Halloween night, set it in the middle of a grassy field, and set it off. I lived about a mile away as the crow flies. I was handing out candy to kids and heard a loud boom, way off in the distance. The explosion blew out house windows for a couple blocks. I had friends that lived a few hundred yards away, and they thought their own houses blew up. The police said on the news that they were surprised it didn't collapse the gymnasium. Also said that the gunpowder used could have gone off from a good bump in the car's trunk. It left a hole 5 feet across and 3 feet down. All the grass about 10 feet out was sheared and laying on its side, like it popped out of the ground. The guy that did it got expelled. I heard he only lived another 10 years and had a tough life, short as it was. Thanks for listening to Story World. If you enjoyed, consider leaving us a like and subscribing. And most importantly, have a nice day. Or night. We don't discriminate.